Tonight we would like to draw your attention on tonight's program to Volume 12 in the Time Life series. 101 bathroom repairs you can do with a trombone and library paste. That's a different program. I'm sorry. What I really had in mind was to run over tonight some of the, as we like to say in the record business, if I was in the record business, unissued verses, previously unreleased verses of some of the top 40 faves that we have been covering for the last several weeks. Ends and odds. Number one, I guess we'll start off in D, because many people like two sharps, because many people believe that they are too sharp. We're going to have to settle down. Here we go. First off, I was going to point out that if you routinely respond to ordinary questions, just everyday questions, you are crushing all potential for any sort of plain think, straight think, revolutionary thinking, as opposed to that kind of object, thing-oriented knowledge vis-a-vis compared to what we're trying to call thinking. And it doesn't matter what. Now, with anybody singing, I do not have to point out that there are certain aspects of the game of life in the city that you must comply with. But insofar as you internally, your own neural battlefield, your own neural building site, for you to seriously entertain the questions and for it to be an internal, serious response to the question, you are absolutely crushing. I didn't want to say destroying. I was going to say that for later. You are crushing any potential to think as opposed to come to a conclusion, as opposed to knowledge. I don't see, surely after all this time, that there's much need to stay on that one area other than perhaps point out the ultimate describable manifestation of that is responding to the inquiry of what kind of guy are you, which you are confronted with consistently by life under two or three, even several guises, with a continual inquiry as to what kind of guy are you. For you to seriously respond to that, do you understand, is a kind of frontal, inescapable assault upon your own neural possibilities of thinking beyond that. Because any time, and life is simply the way the neural aspect of the secondary world is structured, whenever you're asked to respond to a question, the only sane response has got to be a conclusion-oriented, a thing-based answer, or else you are going to qualify as being one of Daffy Duck's cousins. It would not make sense to any other intellect. That is the kind of information flow, the kind of flow that is a form of energy going from one person to another, for anyone to ask you a question. The basic question about, well, what kind of guy are you? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? And if you to take this literally at the secondary level would be foolish, because you would be involved with the kinds of non sequiturs that if you do not listen beyond that level, you might think that some of the chi-roots are. But it's more than that. But indeed, if you try to do it with ordinary people, that is, if you are simply standing there in the midst of the common, everyday, systemic structures of life, and this energy comes to you in the form of a question. What do you do for a living? Where are you from? Aren't you related to so-and-so? And internally, your neural structure tried to take this literally to an ordinary person and said something. Say the question was, what do you do for a living? And you says, $1.95. Now you can say that that is not a routine response, but I just use that example to point out that you cannot do it at that level. And also, it's inexplicable what I'm talking about at that level, because ordinary intelligence will have to say, well, what's the other possibility? The other possibility, as always, is don't do it. And then ordinary intelligence says, well, how? Which is similar to ordinary intelligence saying, God damn, I hate for these phone calls I keep getting. They drive me crazy. And if someone even stranger than you were to say, well, wait a minute, slip me $1.95 and I'll tell you how to take care of that. And so they do, and you give them a nickel change. And you say, don't answer the phone. They say, I want my money back. You missed it? Doctor, it hurts when I do this. There's a tiger behind my door and it keeps making noise. Well, there's noise in everybody's house. Yeah, but every time I open the door, it grabs me. What am I going to do? And ordinary, and of course, don't have to look at it here. We're not attacking somebody else. Look at your own nervous system. It is simply the arrangement, the structure of the life of life, specifically flowing through man, that I assume by now that is silly, or as obvious it may sound to some of you. Think about it. People pay money nowadays to all the little baby bell companies. I don't know what they call them all, but all sorts of things to where your phone won't ring if certain people call, or your phone, it's $4 or $5 or $10 a month. I don't know what. I assume they got smart enough, they're going to stop soon, that most old phones, or I assume still phones, they got a switch to cut your bell off to where it won't even ring. But if you point that out, I assume they're still making that unit, but people are now paying money. Not attacking people, not attacking the phone company. But do you understand? All right, we're not talking about phone calls. You understand that, don't you? We're talking about life making phone calls to you. That is, the energy comes along, that someone says, or they don't even have to say much of anything. They just look at you like, and you go, wait a minute. Oh, no, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. And later you complain. Why is it everywhere I go, people look at me, they think I'm a cross-dresser in my spare time? There's something, And you say, well, are you sure? Oh, I'm positive. Do you understand? And they say, what can I do about it? How come everybody thinks I'm an idiot? People just look at me and they just know I'm an idiot. What they're doing is responding to the phone ringing and then them complaining. I get the damnedest calls. I get calls that drive me crazy. What can I do? All right, I'm going to make it $1.49 this time. All right, I'll try it again. Don't answer the phone. It was no good at $1.95. Give them a bargain rate, they'll still say, you're crazier than people that call me. Give my money back. The point of all that was, because I was afraid, as always, that it was too direct, that is the alternative that ordinary intelligence cannot comprehend. Do you understand? It's not an attack on anybody, but to say, doctor, it hurts when I do this. And we can stop and go into all kinds of conditions and ramifications and possibilities that it has to be a certain thing, that's the only thing hurting. So an ordinary intelligence can say, wait a minute, that's a joke. That's an old joke to say, doctor, it hurts when I do this, what can I do? And the doctor says, don't do that. You can say, all right, that's a joke, but if you're trying to imply that has some other greater metaphorical or, God forbid, symbolic significance, no, it doesn't. Because then we've got to say, if you really mean something by this, there's something wrong. We're talking about some sort of an orthopedic problem, some kind of trauma to the man's muscle, and it just goes on and on and on. You see, because ordinary intelligence is not wired up. That is not the way energy flows, and especially, in particular, which is our only concern here, other than that and muscle fatigue, is brain fatigue. But the flow of energy that runs the neural system in man is not wired up in any way to handle the kind of energy, and now we are speaking, I will admit, symbolically. To say it hurts when I do this, forget anything else. But that's what ordinary intelligence can't do, because it says, no, you're saying that the answer to it hurts when I do this, you're saying that the punchline of the joke is actually some sort of diagnosis or prescription. No, it's beyond that. It's down there close to a cure. It's why ordinary intelligence can't hear it. It hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. Yeah. Is there a real doctor here? I mean, somebody here can help me. That is ordinary intelligence. That is never an alternative. It is not. Do you see that has any connection to where we started? Well, if I try real hard, but it makes my head hurt, well, don't do that. Because some people do this, and I always assume that they were mashing their head and making it hurt, but I didn't want to say anything. I'm trying hard to Oh, well. Now, could you try and turn it even more specifically internally? Because I started to say this is real easy to miss, but I guess the first part is probably as easy to miss as anybody would care to have it. But for those of you who are suckers for a sucker punch, it's even a little more subtle. Is that you can not improperly look at the kind of internal operations at the ordinary level of your own thinking, your own neural activities, as it being, that is you apparently communicating with yourself, assuming all of you would now understand that you do talk to yourself. Everybody does. That is the little joke among all the stories of the partner, and many times maybe the old man and the kid. And it is not the actual old street person that may be wine damaged, muttering to themselves. Quite ordinary, quite reasonable, everyday people. Everyone's talking to themselves if their brain is working. They just don't want to call it that. This kind of communication you can look at as being, quite specifically, a continuing questioning of oneself. Think about it. Or am I going to have to do it for you? And it is not that you are constantly saying, well, it's cold, should I turn on the heat? Of course, I picked a bad example. Many people do that. It's cold, should I turn on the heat, especially since I know that Con Ed has run the rates up. Ordinarily, last year, I might have cut on the heat if I was this cold. But now the rates are really up. I wonder if I could stand it a little more. You are continually in a kind of communication with yourself in the same way that there is no human speech, there is no vocabulary without two words. You can't have one word. You cannot have Boog Powell playing in the outfield unless there's an anti-Boog Powell propping the man up. You cannot have a thought unless there, and now of course there's no sane terms for this, but unless there's a thinker and somebody to go, oh, so that's what you think. But it's all here. There can be no electrical power on this planet in a 3D universe unless it is AC or DC, which is the same thing as AC turned inside out. Everything is polarized. You thinking is a form of you communicating. You have to be aware of what you're thinking. If you're not, I think they call it either being unconscious or being a priest. I forgot. Maybe it's an insurance salesman, just to spread the joy around. A taxi driver. There is, in a quite real sense, a continuing communication going on internally, and it's on the basis of, as subtle as this is, but I think you'll see it in a minute, it is a form of a questioning, such as, and it does not have to, by any means, go in these words, but you'll surely hear this in just a second. It is the feeling that there you are observing something, there you are in the midst of something, and you think, why in the world would somebody do that? You've just been cheated. You've just been insulted. You've just been slighted. Or you see something else, somebody else that you know being insulted. And there's a kind of questioning about why would anybody treat another person like that? Why am I treated this way? It is a kind of questioning. And the only way that you know what you think is you respond to it. Of course, the double-barreled, non-subtle part is you wondering, why am I like I am? That is, if you are at the city level, by city definitions, if you are very introspective, very insightful, very new age, very whatever, that yes, I did get mad again, I did insult that person, I wonder why am I like that? And of course there's some answer. I'm still obviously subconsciously having to work out that kind of captious relationship I had with dear Granny. The thing is, it doesn't matter what the answer is. We're back to where we opened up this particular unissued version. As long as you will respond to an everyday routine inquiry, you have stopped any other possibility. And it doesn't matter what the response is. It should be from a revolutionist to talk to yourself in a different way. It should be more on the basis of this, that if you respond at all, you should be slapping your own little face like, how dare me respond to a question like that? Whatever it is. Are you telling the truth? Are you lying to me? Are you intelligent? Are you as dumb as you act sometimes? How dare me respond to any of that? Not because of some psychological reason, which I could refer you back again if you still want another possible facet to look at all these great stories of these trials of people throughout history, philosophers, social rebels, so-called religious leaders, of them saying, come on, answer us. Who are you? Or what's your middle name? Didn't we see you one time in Indianapolis? Have you been threatening the overthrow of the government? And all these stories about these guys that won't answer, which in several views is a short step from there to martyrdom, which everybody likes to hear about. All ordinary people. But how about some other possibility that all that didn't take place in Athens? Internally, because it would be, how dare me answer that? Not because of the person, not because even of the circumstance, but how dare me stop me from thinking? And if you're going to respond to an everyday question, that's exactly what you have done. You have stopped, let's assume, for the sake of friendly conversation, that you are engaged in some, at least minor flow of actual thinking. And somebody says, wait a minute, did I hear you correctly? And you stop and you respond. It should be as soon as you realize it, how dare me do that? Not them. They're only doing what they have to. They have to breathe. You have to breathe. You got a job. They got a job. All God's children got a job, but you do not have to respond to that seriously. And we can go through, which we've done before, all sorts of suggested verbal tricks about how not to respond. The simplest being is always turn questions back on people, but the tricks, by now, some of you should be past that point that you just simply can refrain from doing it internally. But if nothing else, you just simply turn questions back on people. Just don't do it long enough that they begin to get a glint in their eye that in any way resembles what you might think of as being the Athenian Senate. Because you could be in for grief, especially if they offer you a drink. But just up to a certain point, somebody can ask you, blah, 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 and you just say, if you can, of course, to play this, you have got to be able to extract what you would normally think of as any form of aggression from this return of energy. But you, in other words, you have to do it with no ill will, remembering that ill will for a revolutionist should be actually confined to murder. Other than that, if somebody says, how in the world did you ever decide to take up such and such profession? You say, well, why do you ask? I just can't believe that somebody of your apparent moral decency would be in such a profession. I just wonder why. Have you ever wondered why about such as this before? Well, in your case, I wondered why. Well, why in my case? If you know how to, I'm no longer trying to promote a whole lot of tricks, but that is one way to do it. Plus, if you have never done it, you can learn something about it, because it is simply one form of reversing the natural flow of energy going through life, and it's a kind of short circuit. And if you push it too far, somebody is prone to want to push you. If you know how to do it, though, they'll just give up. But it's subtle, as all of them. But beyond those kinds of tricks, those kinds of methods, is to be able to externally go ahead and be your own Jerry Mahoney, be your own Kermit the Frog, but internally you still got to be Jim Henson. That is, somebody says, why do you do so-and-so and you're in such a position? Let's say it's the man paying your salary, or his wife. And they say, well, why do you do so-and-so? And let's assume that you do not have another job lined up, and as far as the rest of the day you'd like to finish the day out, and they say, well, why did you ever decide to do so-and-so? And all you got to do is have something resembling the ability to actually think, and you know just the routine kind of response that will satisfy the person. You should be able to understand the kind of general motivation that they think they have to ask, and you just simply You know, it's like somebody comes up and says, could I have my coffee with cream? And you say, well, sure. And you give it to them. But let's assume that you don't even drink coffee. Let's assume that you have some even subversive, cosmic, anti-caffeine attitude. Are you following me? That internally you're not even entertaining this. But somebody says, well, could I have a G&T? And you do not drink. And you say, well, certainly, it's your job. Or it's part of your job. But internally, you don't even play with it. It is that internally you can be. You understand, Jim Henson. You can be the one down, instead of laughing at it to you, you got your hand up your own dress. And when you have to, and somebody says, well, why'd you do so-and-so? Or how'd you get here? And you go, blah, 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 blah. And people go, oh. But do not respond to those questions. Because once you get just any taste of it, I don't have to tell you. It's not some kind of law. It's not some kind of religious or moral or philosophical dictum. It's simply you understand. How dare me respond to that? Because all it has done is cut you off neurally at the knees right then. And you got no business ever responding to an everyday, routine, serious inquiry. None. There is nothing whatsoever to be gained, and anybody will send me a self-addressed envelope if you insist that I respond, and you can find an exception, go ahead and send it to me. In fact, that would make a nice excursion. It's tell me, tell yourself. You don't tell me, tell yourself. One example. Now, forget the secondary world. We're not talking about that, because it can be to your advantage if somebody says you're trying to get a job, you're out of work, and they say, well, have you ever had experience in this? And you go, my, yes. We're not talking about that. If we hire you, will you steal from me? Heavens, no. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about internally. Tell me one example wherein you have responded to a serious inquiry, either apparently from yourself, from something that you thought the voices of fate, or that other people, great philosophical questions that have plagued man's soul, especially since Camus turned out the lights. Tell me one example wherein you responded and it was of some benefit, just the least benefit, an iota, a pulgita of benefit, that, responding to that question has really helped me. Now in the city, we all understand by nowadays, you're aware of the fact, in the city, they would say just the opposite. Why else do people go to psychiatrists? Why else do people sit around and chit and chat? The whole idea of communication. The intellectuals of the world. They even say things. I even let Kyrute kind of stick his hand up their knickers. Of people saying, and don't just go with Kyrute. I'm talking about serious scientists, thinkers throughout history have mentioned oftentimes how well they are served when they reach kind of, I don't know, some sort of mental blockage to get around other people, hash out their ideas, fall into that kind of intellectual tug-of-war, wrestling match, discussion with their peers. And that oftentimes that sort of give and take will help them along. If not that, at least when you've got your emotions backing up on you, talk about them. Because how are you going to know how you actually feel unless you talk about them? That your sexual mate keeps saying, well, you've been acting funny. You've been acting funny. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong. But especially, of course, they accuse men, but it's not limited to a sexual bias. And now they say, well, wait a minute. It's better to go ahead and say, well, I tell you, you're right. There is something wrong. You got to where you grab my ass. That's good for the relationship. Well, they say that. I mean, that's progress, because 20 years ago, I can remember when they first started saying that, at least this time around in the Western world, that it's good for you. But now, see, it went from it's good for you to tell somebody else, well, when they keep asking you to tell them why you have been so quiet and what's wrong, and you keep saying nothing's wrong, and they say, well, come on, 20 years ago, at least, they decided in the city that it was good for you to go ahead and say, well, you grab my ass. But see, it went from that to now the progress is it's good for the other person. It's good for the relationship to say, you really rubbed me the wrong way. Who am I to knock progress? All this is still on the basis I want you to see that it is, as always, absolutely irrational. It is not the normal flow of energy for the way life works. Because you're supposed to respond. You're supposed to answer the phone. I still like that example. I hope some of you don't think it's so silly that it's not worthwhile. It's the example. Because people say that. Your nervous system would say it. The phone rings and you think, oh, damn, I just know who that is. And I can't stand it. And you'll walk right over and answer the phone. And then to show how smart you, though, if somebody else is there, you'll pick it up. And when you see, you'll look at them like, the other person like, I told you. To show how smart you are. I told you who it's going to be. God Almighty. That is the normal flow. There's nothing wrong, to say the least. That is the kind of necessary expansion. It is the flow of blood. It is the flow of oxygen in the life of life via man. That people do that. They got no choice. And you could say, well, if you're sure who it is, oh, I know. Well, why don't you not answer? Now, you know what would happen to ordinary people. Not people under a care of a psychiatrist, but ordinary people, your own nervous system, would look at that like, oh, come on. You say, no, well, don't answer if you know who it is. And they can't. They cannot not answer. Forget phone calls and other people who may be annoying them. This cannot not respond to these ordinary inquiries about, well, what kind of guy are you? But it doesn't have to be a specific, overt, verbalized question. Life is continually making everyone respond to, what kind of guy are you? Don't you see? Being alive. If this is your center, the old level, that is life. That is you being you. That is every individual at that level being yourself. If we were actually engaged in some form of sarcasm and social criticism, you could say, well, that's the whole basis of this phony baloney world out there. Of everybody saying how important it is to be well thought of, how important it is to have the right kind of up-to-date hairdo, how important it is to be concerned that there are people on the other side of the world killing each other for very serious reasons, religious reasons, for instance. And it's just the whole thing about being a humane, sophisticated, reasonable, up-to-date person on this planet. If it was no more than some form of sarcastic, not sardonic, just be, let's call an ace an ace. Call you later. And just to refer to that as just some sort of just make-believe, insane, Looney Tune, Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney. Who needs that? There is no real defense to that. It's why that sort of sarcasm, that kind of attack, is so deadly. And it's why that is not very popular. Life does not tolerate it. But there is no response to it. But once you see that that world operates on a basis that life is making you continue to respond to questions. The main question is, what kind of guy are you? Because in the secondary world, unless there is this operational illusion of your individuality and your supreme importance. Now, I know it's important to you, no offense. But your supreme importance, like, well, some way the world would be seriously lacking if right now I just kind of dropped dead or passed away. All right. If that's too close to still sarcasm, how about, all right, it's not just me and my religion, me and my immediate group of my sect of this religion, or me and my state, me and my nation, me and my race, me and this subdivision, me and my neighborhood, me and other right-thinking people, which of course means people who think like you. If you said, or if you tried to hint, if I was still playing this just ordinary sarcasm is all we can call it, this kind of view, and I said, well, you're pretty smart, you're really sophisticated to admit that you personally, if you drop dead, that the general scheme of life would not be adversely tilted one way or the other. Yeah, I guess you'd say that. But you're saying now that if a large number, that you say that you are indicative of a group of people who do play a positive role in life. And we're not yet making fun of it, so. Even at the ordinary level, and they say, yes, that I do represent the conservative arm of the Catholic Church. I do represent the middle of the political spectrum of Europe. Right now, that's my attitude, and that's very important. The way things are changing, you can't say otherwise. If you then said, all right, you agree, I'm still talking to him, you agree that you personally dropping dead, as much as you might regret it individually, as far as you know, but you will admit, is that what you're saying? You will admit that it might not change the political balance that is now kind of restructuring itself in Europe. No, probably not. But you're saying that if everyone who thinks like you, this kind of more centralist political view of the change between the so-called First and Second World, East and West political struggles, the way it's now working itself out over the last 13 months in Europe, you're saying that if everyone who thinks like you, decent, middle of the road, free market, and whatever they are, that if you're saying that if everybody similar to you, which goes into the millions, if they all drop dead, that it would have an effect. And they go, well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. See, here we are confronted with ordinary intelligence again, because if that were to happen, then they're correct to say, well, there's no doubt. If 3 million people who think like me drop dead, it would have an effect. Right? But do you hear the rest of it? To begin with, that can't happen. And so they're safe in saying, well, I agree. That would have an effect, because ordinary intelligence can always agree that something that's impossible would have an immediate, a specific effect. I mean, if you don't believe that, go down and wonder, how of all the churches and the synagogues and the temples and the mosques, how are they still open? Not to mention psychiatrists open, offices. As long as something is absolutely impossible to happen. Now they can't, but again, now we're back to the subtleness that ordinary intelligence could say, well, it's not impossible that 3 million people could drop dead or 10 million people could drop dead. That there is no law of physics that we know of. They got me again. Except you and I know. It's not even much of a subversive level. It's not much of a revolution itself. You just know there is nothing in history, nothing whatsoever, even though we can't say this literally impossible, there is nothing that's ever happened on the face of this planet to lead you to believe that at one fell swoop, let's say that 10 million people is going to drop dead. Of course, that don't stop people from believing in religion and psychiatry and economics and weather forecasting. But the response would be, it could happen, and if it did happen, it would have an absolute specific effect. Do you see any connection between that and responding to life, continually asking what kind of guy you are? Because that is the scenario I just played out, as abstruse as it may have gotten, of me talking to this person who admitted finally, well, if I drop dead, that is, if I answer about me, maybe it wouldn't matter. But people do not believe they're answering just for them if you push them. They say, no, I'm a reflection of something greater. Well, that's not just sarcastic, because we're really getting off, those of you who are trying to fly off sideways, because in a sense, that's true. They don't understand it, because all they're admitting is that they don't know what they're going to say next. All they're admitting is everything they think, they stole. That is, they're admitting that everything they do, everything they feel, everything they think is attributed to Jim Henson. That is, they don't know who they are, why they are, what they're about, except, of course, you can't put it that way. You are operationally denying, that is, you're operationally conceding what I just said, if you do not respond to the ordinary questions. There is the difficulty. What? I shouldn't say things like difficulty. For ordinary people, it's impossible For ordinary people, if it wasn't impossible and they could hear it, they'd say, who wants to do it? So I shouldn't keep saying about things that are difficult or hard to do. All that is really sort of like catnip. It's if you want to do it and you can hear it, you can do it. And there's just no way to explain it. If you do hear it and you think, oh, by God, you're right. You quit hurting. But see, if you got an ordinary person, and they say, oh, and you say, well, if it hurts when you do that, don't do that. And they go, ah. Then they'd say, why did that work? You say, don't ask why. But wait a minute, I don't understand this. Such, by the way, is the nature, if you want a little more specifically, is the nature of what ordinary people throughout history like to refer to as miracles. Because the miracle is something extraordinary happened, and they ask why, and it stopped, and so then they turn to process, they cut it back into a thing, and see, all miracles are post-operative. There's no such thing as a current miracle. You'll never find anybody engaged in a miraculous occurrence. It's always, if it was a miracle, they say, I was cured of so-and-so. I used to have horrible dreams, and I went to the psychiatrist, or whatever it is. The miracle is always yesterday, 10,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, last week. But there is no such thing as a miracle now, because for it to be a miracle now, a person would have to respond at least to themselves or somebody else of life saying, how come you act so different, so differently? It was only 6 months ago I saw you, and you are a changed person. Well, I don't normally like to talk about it, but whatever the miracle was, it's over. Assuming it was a miracle. That's not what it should be called. But I was just pointing out as a real aside that that is the nature of miracles, not just religious, but of all kinds. It's always something after the fact, and it was always that now somebody stopped and went, oh, that, and that's a miracle. That is, they stopped whatever it was, and so then you got to call it something. They could have called it, well, that was the last train to Clarkston. But instead of that, the bus just left. Oh, that doesn't, a miracle. That's it. That sounds better than the tail end of a trailways. Of course, a real miracle from another view would be being able to be in the midst of a process and to let it go. And that all the weight, all the great weight of the cosmos being upon you, wanting to say, come on, tell us what's going on. Tell me. This is life speaking to you. This is your daddy. Come on, you can tell me, come on. You go, well, all right. Then it's a miracle. Yeah, it hurts now, but you should have seen me. It was no more than an hour ago. I was able to stop it. Oh, it's a miracle. Well, you hurt for years, I know. And are you serious? Now, I wasn't here, but have I ever lied to you? No, not as close as we are. I am telling you, I don't want to go into exactly how, but I heard about this idea. And it was no more than an hour ago I stopped it. God, that's amazing. Well, I'm telling you, I'm not even that religiously inclined. But I don't know what else to call it except a miracle. But see, as long as it was here, it's not a miracle. It simply is. It is because a miracle was an anomaly that is no more. You have stopped and you have responded to the ordinary question. Any question. And of course, the general category that I was trying to get you to consider is, what kind of guy are you? Because every time, and I don't mean this just literally, because I know there's been all sorts of little groups have tried to do such as this, and it's been popping up in religions, but people trying not to say the word I, people trying not to refer themselves, and then they scratch their heads with steel brushes and say it's some form of humility. But what they don't understand is the basis of that was somewhere somebody did have an understanding before of don't answer questions. And so then it comes out, well, God, I don't know, that sounds great. There was some leader somewhere that dressed up and he went, all right, you want to know the secret? Don't ever say I. Don't ever refer to yourself, because the great forces, the great poobahs in the sky, they got no use For little smartasses like you, any of us, that are trying to do this great secret work that would be so egotistical enough to even think of themselves. So the trick is, just don't even say I. Don't even think I. It all fits, by God. It fits in every religion. It just sounds like even in a more aggressive step from organized religions, that this would be the kind of supreme form of humility. You've heard it all. I'll have to start to empty the vessel that is myself, that is my soul, of the great liquid of egoism and self-importance, so I could be empty and the great God's forces, whatever they're calling it now, could pour out understanding, humility, perhaps a little club soda, and fill my soul. You understand all this is a reflection is, what I'm telling you is, do not respond to the energies that drive the ordinary life. And the energies primarily come out, the way I'm describing it in this verse, they come out with this continuing inquiry that they want you to answer for your life, for your existence. Who are you? What are you doing? What kind of guy are you? Why did you say that? What do you think? How come you keep doing the same thing over and over? How come you're so unpredictable? Then it comes out about, well, what we should do is try and strip ourselves of egoism, which by now, do I have to even carry this any further? Being at the ordinary level and being thing-oriented will only lead to what everything leads to at that level, irony. That is, you become proud of being the most humble person in your little group. And that's the only thing you can do. And if you think, no, I'm going to fight against that, then finally the leader will say, you come back here, I want to tell you something secret. I want to tell you what, you are getting to be more humble than anybody I've ever helped before. Are you serious? Yes. It's not sarcasm. It is life. That the output of everything at the polarized level has got to be irony. If it does not become ironic, you didn't succeed at all. In other words, if what you know does not become in part what you don't know, then you don't know anything. Part of what you believe at the ordinary level does not become at least part of what you don't believe. If part of trying to be successful, do the right thing, do the proper thing, does not lead to people kicking you around, then you didn't even try to do right. And I'm just using everyday terms. It is the responding to the ordinary flow of energy at the intellectual level, at the neural level, that is very well exemplified by my phrase of responding to ordinary, routine, everyday inquiries. You are still on the main track. You're part of the general systematic structure of the neural system that is man every time you respond. And every time you respond, you have committed a form of neural suicide. Because when you respond, you cannot right then say anything else. You cannot think anything else. You have switched the tracks, and the energy coming in and driving your neurons and your potential, it has to go in the same old track or some old track that has nothing to do with thinking for you to respond to the question, whatever it is. Is your name Hubert? It doesn't matter whether your name's Hubert or not. And it doesn't matter whether you say yes or no. It doesn't matter whether you tell the truth. Your name's Hubert. Yes, it is. It doesn't matter if you did that. It doesn't matter if they says that life says, is your name Hubert? And you say, and your name is Hubert, and you say, no, it's not, and you lied. Doesn't matter. Or vice versa. As long as you seriously respond, you are being driven by that same energy that drives everything else. And it stops thinking as opposed to knowledge. Another verse that we just hit in passing a few in the last several weeks. As you recall, sort of noticed as it went flying by that a real revolutionist doesn't do explanations. Now, it doesn't matter what your job apparently is in the city. It doesn't matter how unusual, how singular might be some of the demands of your particular job, symbolically speaking. It doesn't matter. You still do not have to do explanations. Explanations, of course, is being, if you want to strike the of course, is being a little more specific about responding to questions. Doing explanation can also be seen as being a kind of unabashed, undiluted form of passing judgment. to do explanations, you are helping life as you're supposed to. You are helping life take the processes that run everything and to bring it to the neural level, and it's to help stop them, set them up, in quotation marks, set them up as though they were things so that apparently the rest of us, that is humanity, can deal with them. When life asks you for an explanation, when life asks you to pass judgment, when that life asks you to explain, what it's asking you to do is whatever your little job is, and of course you don't know what your damn job description is until you know what it's not. And you think, well, all right, it's like you can't resist. It says, what's going to happen if we let the conservatives take over? What's going to happen if the liberals continue this onslaught? Whatever it is. And you go, so you're asking me. You're really interested. You have stopped whatever process we're talking about. And we're not talking about the process that appears, but it's just been named. The one I brought up seemed to be a political stream of it. But you have stopped it, and you have helped turn the process into something that can be propped up. It can be set up. Like the big old furry cats, you remember, at the carnival. You can set it up, and as long as you can set it up, then you can apparently throw something at it. You can apparently criticize it. You can apparently deal with it in some way if it's a thing. But nothing becomes a thing unless somebody will do an explanation. And who will refuse to do explanations? Now, I know the reason I pointed out, I know the little joke. There are people who refuse to do windows. But who in the city will refuse to do explanations? What clarion can cry out to the city, is there someone down there? Don't fall into the Old Testament trap, like is there someone down there who does not fool around or drink whiskey, or is there a decent person? Forget that. The real cry is there someone in this city who won't do explanations? Well, to begin with, the city, they wouldn't even understand it. But if they did, if they insisted, to the voices coming from the heaven, are you seriously asking who here won't do explanations? The voice said, yep. They said, no, wait, you mean you're asking, is there somebody here that will refuse to do explanations? Yes, hurry up. And if they were finally convinced, well, that's what he's really asking, they wouldn't know what to do. Because there's nobody that's going to say, well, yeah, me. Because if the voice is smart enough to be, that big, they figure it's somebody bigger than we are and smarter, they're going to know that he's lying. Because if one guy finally stands up, if the voice gets threatening, is there somebody there in that one city who will not do explanations? And they catch on that it's some sort of threat. Like if we don't come up with somebody, I got a feeling that we're going to have hell to pay. And so one guy says, yes, me. Do I have to go any further? Do you want irony? Because then the voice would say, how did you ever get to be that strong? Did you understand my question? Doesn't matter what, the voice would ask something else, and now you've got irony. Unless, of course, they're going to push it any further, which you remember you can't take it one question further, because if the kid, whoever stood up and said, yes, me, I can not do explanations. And the voice says, how long have you been able to do this? Huh? I'm off on a different one this time. And the kid won't answer. And the voice says, do you understand the significance of you refusing to answer? Have you got any idea who this is asking you? How many more questions do you think I'm going to ask you before perhaps the unexpected might occur? How much, that's not going to happen, but how much could somebody withstand? And it's not because now of some moral strength, some supreme understanding they had, because at the city level, I remind you, you're supposed to do explanations. Everybody does explanations. That's part of the job. There's another way, a slightly, if not a skewed, getting closer to the bone of it, that you can look at doing explanations, besides that you're helping life, as you're supposed to, take the processes and set them up to make them appear to be things, to make them then appear to be in such a condition that in some way we can deal with. If not me, then us, humanity, we can deal with them. A slightly spin-off of that would be to look at on this basis, that every time you do explanations, what it represents to you is a kind of acceptance of the meaningless, from a revolutionist view, from a meaningless exclusivity. That is, of what your explanation was. Because when you give it, that's your explanation. Oh, that was too obvious, right? Well, how do I know what I mean, what I know, what I believe until I say it? So that's what you think, eh? That's what I said, wasn't it? That's your opinion. Yes, that's my opinion. My name's Hubert, and that's the Hubert opinion on that matter. Now, you're not just repeating something you've read. No. I do read, but I extract what I want here and there, and I question the sources. I consider who it was that wrote this. But then I form my own conclusions. And that, my friend, was my Hubert conclusion on that matter. The explanation is an absolute acceptance. It is an unconditional embrace that your passing of judgment is worthy and is exemplary of the exclusivity of proper knowledge. To do a conclusion is not only to wash a window, it's to wash the window in such a way that no one can ever see out of it again. No one ever has to do it. Now, of course, we're talking about you. That the question, well, what do you think about so-and-so? And you explain yourself. You explain the particular area in which you're being questioned. And you do it in the same way that people say, you know, in the city, everybody does windows. And so by doing an explanation, it's in a strange way that obviously is irrational. But it's like to do a window, but you do it in such a way that for any foreseeable time, no one can see in, and you certainly can't see out. You have accepted this kind of meaningless exclusivity to your explanation. But you've got to. Because if you give an explanation and somebody says, well, wait a minute. Now, I kind of trusted you. I thought you were an expert in this field. And you said, well, some say I am. All right, now, what you just explained, is that the only explanation? I mean, I've all my life I wanted to be sure that 2 and 2 is 4. And you say it is, yes? Well, you know, what's the alternative? There is no damn alternative. None? You know, go away, kid. You bother me. I thought you wanted some information. It is the exclusivity of your explanation. How do you know that's true? Well, for one thing, I have a PhD in mathematics. Anything else? I have a PhD in mathematics from MIT. K-E-Y. M-O, no. Well, is there anything else? Why else should I take your word for this? Why should I believe that exclusively 4 is the only possible explanation for what is the sum of 2 and 2? All right? Because it is. Do you understand? There's nothing wrong at the city level, certainly, with taking 2 and 2 to be exclusively 4. If you don't, you know, I don't want to send you to the store and expect any change back. But every time you accept the explanation, not of somebody else, but the explanation of your response to explain yourself, what do we know about this? What you know has got to be exclusive. An explanation is no explanation if you say, what's 2 and 2? And the answer, the explanation is 4. You go, come on. They say, okay, 5. All right, get serious. 3. Who's going to stay with that kind of apparent source? You're getting no explanations. 2 or 3 other things. So if we just got a minute. Well, 3 or 4 then. Doing explanations. Doing explanations is a form of violence directed toward one's neural potential. Doing explanations is a form of mental murder done apparently in the name of and for the sake of knowledge. But I might point out, let's get Anglo if not Saxon. I might point out, doing this kind of mental murder for apparently the sake of knowledge, this would be the kind of, are we ready for this? This would be a form of a Becket death for which the king can offer no sufficient reward. Anybody catch that? In other words, if you're going to stoop so low as to kill yourself by dealing with knowledge, and you're going to wait to be rewarded, King Henry, all of his ancestors, he could have called upon the banks on the continent, and the murder, that kind of Becket in yourself, if you're a revolutionist, there is not possibly a sufficient reward to make up to the blackguards who did that. Or looked at it another way. You could say that all passing of judgment, any form of doing explanations, is simply murder done to variety. Not one Becket. There'd have to be untold Beckets, which is what would be, relatively speaking, the process of thinking, as opposed to one guy that would stand still long enough to get stabbed. Because that's what happens. It's this whole process, or the way they used to show in comic books, whoever it was, Plastic Man or somebody, was just this blur running. If you got that many Beckets, you're all right. We're talking about processes. We're talking about thinking. But if life says, Thomas a Becket, and it stops, then Henry nods, and they jump out behind the curtains and go, but as you die, you go, well, at least I know what's going on. At least I now have some knowledge. Because there you are in the process of being alive, that is thinking, and the voice says, Becket, is that you? And you stop. You say, yes, that's me. But at least you know something. You know that you've been stabbed right there in the last minute. You know that I'd have probably been better off not to answer, come to think about it. It is the knowledge, it is the certainty from the ordinary level for which no one, for a revolutionist now we're speaking of only, that no one can offer a sufficient compensation. Completely out. Right? Don't hang around cathedrals late at night. Especially if you haven't bathed in a few years. I always figured it was well,